Hi, I'm William Stewart, co-founder of Teleios. Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Mark. We're in chapter 5. We've just finished talking about the casting out of the demons, out of the man in the tombs, along the tombs in the Sea of Galilee, and casting them into the swine. The people of the town didn't really like this and asked him to leave. And again, he went across the lake with his disciples. The multitude follow him. Again, this is the Sea of Galilee. And we are in chapter verse 22. And he came upon one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus, by name. And when he saw him, he fell on his feet and said his daughter was at the point of death. And if you could just lay hands on her, she could live. Now, interesting, this is the head of the synagogue. And these people were typically rejecting Christ and his ministry. But here, when his need is acute and personal, he comes for help. So it's not really saying he's believing, but he is obviously in a desperate situation. Christ followed him as well as the people, and on his way, a woman who had a chronic problem with bleeding touched him or came up to him. It had a problem for 12 years. She had been gone to many physicians, by which it seemed that she was harmed. And that's not a surprise at this time, as the medical arts were very primitive. And she had also spent all her money. So this had been going on for a while. You can imagine she'd be very anemic and weak. We don't know the cause of this. It might be related to her childbirth events. And you could see potentially it would ultimately lead to her death. Because of this chronic bleeding that would have been difficult to stop. So she went and touched his garment in verse 27, and he stopped. And he knew somebody touched him, Christ, because the power, literally dunamis in the original Greek, where we get the word dynamite, left him. And he asked the disciples, "Who touched me?" And she saw that she had been found out and went to him trembling and fell down before him. In verse 34, he said, "Daughter, thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole from thy literally plague or beating." He called this bleeding. Again, we don't know if she believed, but she was healed. Again, it was a demonstration of Christ's power and authority over the human body and nature, and in order to heal, and that he was fulfilling prophecy from the Old Testament, like I think Isaiah 35:5, Isaiah 61:1 and 2, as we'll see in our next healing as well. So he went on. He came to the ruler of the synagogue's house, which said, "Thy daughter is dead. Why, troublest the master further?" So the basically saying, give it up. But he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Be not afraid, only believe." So there was a measure of perhaps fear of bothering Christ here, or what Christ might do to him if he troubled them, knowing his power. But he said, believe. And of course, this is the constant message in the Gospels, to believe. It's what God wanted the people in the Old Testament to do always, was to trust him for their land and their lives and their salvation, as clarified in Hebrews 11. And of course, as church-based believers and Christians, and who come after the death and resurrection of Christ and have believed, we too are to have a daily faith. So he took his closest disciples, James, Peter, and John, into the room, and people were wailing and over the child's death. Now, this is one of only 3 times that Christ took these 3 disciples by themselves. The other one was to uh, um, the transfiguration of Christ, as we'll see this in Mark 8, Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Matthew 17. Also, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ took them deeper to pray the night before his crucifixion. So I think that shows as important as that time of prayer was in Gethsemane, in the Transfiguration. It makes you think of the importance of this healing of Jairus' daughter to raise her from the dead. And this is the first time Christ has raised someone from the dead. He'll also raise the child of the widow of Nain in Luke 7, and also, of course, Lazarus in John 11. I think all typing the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the new life. God is the giver of life. Christ is the giver of life and salvation, and he will provide it through his own resurrection. So Christ said in verse 39 that your daughter is not dead, she just sleeps. And people laughed him to scorn. So again, the crowd didn't seem to be believing. They didn't get it or want to understand who Christ was here. Were they there for the spectacle? Perhaps they were there only because of the death of the daughter, to wail and maybe comfort the family. But there must have been others that followed him who wanted to see healing or wanted to be healed. So Christ took the hand of the girl and said, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And she did arise and walk. She was 12 years old, and people were, of course, astonished that he would raise him from the dead. Christ then charged them to tell nobody and to give the child something to eat. That was nice. Why did he say don't tell anybody about the healing? Well, we don't know. I think at this point, and again, you might disagree, so decide on yourself, he's been rejected by the authorities, and he's tending to minister outside of Jerusalem, so like where the leadership is and the Roman authorities is. So I think in order to have a smooth ministry, without the trouble of the Pharisees who might go to the Romans and charge him with sedition, that he was the king, who might want to take over Rome and to come in conflict with Roman authorities too early in his ministry before his time had come, as John expresses it in his gospel in chapter 2, several times in chapter 7, that, and I think in chapter 9, I'm forgetting, but his time did come right before the cross in John 12. So he had a ministry to do, which he spent 3 years doing, and it was probably better without complication, being under the radar to an extent. So he charged them that nobody would know. Now, we don't know if they did that or not. So what have we seen here today? Well, we've seen two great healings. One is the woman with the chronic bleeding, but especially Christ raises this young girl from the dead the first time he's done this, showing even more his power over life and death and human events and nature, and his graciousness, and typing, I think, what he would do on the cross. Again, all showing that he is God and he is Messiah, or Christ. Okay, thank you for joining me today. We'll start chapter 6 next time, which is really a new segment of this gospel as he goes further outside of Galilee and to the Gentile areas and other areas, some other areas beyond that lake, the Sea of Galilee. Okay, I'll look forward to seeing you then.